I say that the search for God was not reasoning but a feeling, because that search proceeded not from the course of my thoughts, it was even directly contrary to them, but proceeded from the heart. It was a feeling of fear, orphanage, isolation in a strange land, and a hope of help from someone. Leo Tolstoy was born into a well-known family of old Russian nobility at their Yasnaya Polyana estate. As was typical of the time, he was raised, at least outwardly, in the Russian Orthodox Church. However, by the time he attended university, any semblance of his faith had dissipated. In a confession, Tolstoy recalls, "Judging by certain memories, I never seriously believed, but had merely relied on what I was taught and on what was professed by the grown-up people around me, and that reliance was very unstable." Tolstoy would go on to establish himself as one of the most acclaimed and influential writers in literary history, with two of his major works, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, being read and praised globally. Tolstoy's first half of life was outwardly one of great fortune and success. Inwardly, however, Tolstoy was beginning to fall into crisis. A lifelong hunter, he began refraining from taking his gun out with him, unable to trust himself to be alone with his thoughts and his rifle. Tolstoy had descended to the brink of suicide. He recounted in his personal writings that his life had lost all sense of meaning. The ground he had built his life upon had collapsed, and there was nothing left to live on. In a confession, Tolstoy wrote, "Why should I live? Why wish for anything or do anything?" It can also be expressed thus: "Is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy?" Tolstoy consulted the wisest of his peers within his circles on the fundamental questions of who one is and what the purpose of life is. He received the answer that man is no more than an accidental clutter of parts, that there is no purpose to life, and that life itself is inherently evil. These answers pushed Tolstoy into further despair. "And so what is a person to do with their life?" he asked. Having come to this point, Tolstoy could only see three possible outcomes. The first was either to ignore the question, or to distract from it by the pursuit of pleasure, as he puts it, drown it in life's intoxication. The second was the path of strength and energy, embracing the futility of life and ending it on one's own suicidal terms. The third path was that of weakness, clinging to life, knowing in advance that nothing can come of it. And yet, in his increasing despair, Tolstoy found a fourth way. Reflecting back to his childhood when he believed in God, he remembered his life being imbued with a sense of meaning and purpose, and he remembered the believers surrounding him who, largely uncorrupted by riches, lived real lives. He observed that while his aristocratic peers largely rejected Christianity, faith remained strong among the Russian peasants. Unlike the intellectuals who endlessly debated meaning without resolution, the peasants lived their faith, enduring suffering with a remarkable sense of peace. He wrote, "They accepted illness and sorrow without any perplexity or opposition, and with a quiet and firm conviction that all is good. These folk live and suffer, and they approach death and suffering with tranquility, and in most cases gladly." Tolstoy was not blind to the harsh realities of their lives. He had seen firsthand their suffering and exploitation. And yet, while the wealthy masked their existential despair with amusements, the poor seemed to possess an unshakable sense of purpose. He sensed that perhaps there was something buried and hidden within the Christian teaching that was worthwhile, and that something could give meaning to his life. He had found a path which brought him back to the religious faith previously abandoned in his adolescence. He began to study the Christianity that he saw applied in daily life and compare that applied belief with its source. Tolstoy was not seeking to merely adhere to a set of beliefs and rules to comfort him in a time of despair. and his rational mind wouldn't allow him to embrace much of the historicity concerning miracles and the resurrection. He was in search of real knowledge, that which could be sensed within him, and would give him a resolution to the question of the meaning and purpose of his life, and which would not be destroyed when he died. He wrote, "The conception of God is not God. The conception is what takes place within me. The conception of God is something I can evoke or can refrain from evoking in myself. That is not what I seek. I seek that without which there can be no life." But then I turned my gaze upon myself, on what went on within me, and I remembered all those cessations of life and reanimations that recurred within me hundreds of times. I remembered that I only lived at those times when I believed in God. As it was before, so it was now. I need only be aware of God to live. I need only forget Him and I died. What is this animation and dying? I do not live when I lose belief in the existence of God. I should long ago have killed myself had I not had a dim hope of finding Him. I live, really live, only when I feel Him and seek Him. "What more do you seek?" exclaimed a voice within me. "This is He. He is that without which one cannot live. To know God and to live is one and the same thing. God is life." Tolstoy had recognized that to be a Christian meant to live in a certain way. It was a state of being, an awareness and love for God and for other people. To live with knowledge of the sacred and to sense within the deeper reality beyond himself and the culture he was born into. He had been impressed by the peasants he observed because the way in which they lived transcended their external conditions and showed him that they were aware of the light of grace and truth within. Cleansed inwardly, they were people of love, humility, and a self-transcendent peace. They had become passers-by. In the preface to the Gospel in Brief, Tolstoy stated, "I did not know the light and thought there was no truth in life, but having become convinced that people could only live by this light, I began seeking its source and found it in the Gospels, despite the false interpretations by the churches. And having arrived at this source of light, I was blinded by it and given full answers to my questions concerning the meaning of life and the lives of others. Live seeking God, and then you will not live without God. And more than ever before, all within me and around me lit up, and the light did not again abandon me."